Week 16 of the fantasy football season. So with the semifinals coming up in most fantasy leagues, he's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking this week. Number one, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. Last week it was a big game for Bijan, over 150 yards from scrimmage. This week a great matchup, fast track at Arizona. And he's just having a great year. I know a couple games here and there, he hasn't put up big numbers, but we've seen that with other backs as well, where they've had some good games and some bad games. But this week at Arizona, I like Bijan as the top back. Number two, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins, the most efficient back, I think, all season long. Him and Christian McCaffrey, where weekly it's at least 15-plus fantasy points for Devon Achane. This week a slam dunk matchup when Cincinnati coming in, and at least Miami, they're home, where the last couple weeks, bad weather ball games and cold weather games at New York. At the Jets, it was week 14, and then week 15 at Pittsburgh, where it was freezing on Monday night. So Achane, regardless, he's been going out there weekly, and like I said, the most steady back possibly in all fantasy football. Number three, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. It's been a great year for CMC. This week, indoor ball game at the Indianapolis Colts, where their run defense isn't all that great, and I think CMC, he's going to go out there, he's going to get his usual at least 15, 20 fantasy points. It just seems like weekly he's finding the end zone. I know yards per carry this season haven't been good for Christian McCaffrey, but he's a stud running back, and he's a guy weekly that's putting up his points. Number four, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So last week, leading the comeback from 21-0, scored 3 touchdowns. This week, a little bit of a tougher matchup at the Cleveland Browns, even though we saw last week DeAndre Swift have a big game versus defense. But James Cook, he's a top running back once again this season, and a big part of Buffalo's offense. A decent matchup this week at Cleveland. I think he has another good game. Number 5, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So Jahmyr Gibbs, it's been up and down over the last few weeks. One monster game and one bad game. And versus better defenses, he struggled, Jahmyr Gibbs. But this week, Lions are back home. Pittsburgh coming in, even though their defense is pretty decent over the last few weeks here. But Gibbs, it's rare to see him have 2 bad games in a row for the most part. Number 6, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. What a season it's been for Josh Jacobs. 14 total touchdowns. Last week, showing off some receiver skills in the back of the end zone, a one-handed grab on a jump ball. So this week at the Bears, where their defense is middle of the pack, but it just doesn't matter. Josh Jacobs, he's the type of running back that's matchup proof, and he's been putting up big games all season long. And this is a run-first offense as well. Number 7, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. The last few weeks, he's starting to get back in rhythm a little bit, is Saquon Barkley. And this week, it's a slam dunk matchup at the Commanders, a defense that can't stop anyone. And Saquon, I know this season he definitely was a bust, going first to second overall in fantasy drafts, but I think he could finish the season out strong. And this week, it's a good matchup, like I said, at Washington. Number 8, Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Bucky Irving been back now for about a month. He's had a couple good games, and then last week, a dud performance it was for Bucky Irving. But this week, a good matchup with the Carolina Panthers. I think he's going to find some running room in this ball game, is Bucky Irving. And also, he's a good receiver out of the backfield, and Rachaad White really isn't a threat to his job. So with those factors and coming off a bad game and getting an extra few days of rest, where that was a Thursday night game last week for Tampa Bay in the tough loss versus Atlanta, I like Irving to bounce back. Number 9, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So JT, it's been a big season for him. I know the last few weeks the numbers have dropped down big time, but he's not going to stay on the tear he was, where he had 3 games in a row with 3 touchdowns each ball game. So this week versus San Francisco, I think they're going to give him the ball a whole lot, is Jonathan Taylor on Monday night. We know Phillip Rivers, he's going to start once again, and obviously they don't want him throwing that football 30, 35 times in this game. So like I said, Jonathan Taylor, he's going to get a lot of volume regardless in this game and work his way into production. Number 10, Trevion Henderson of the New England Patriots. What a game it was last week for Henderson, even though they blew a 21-0 lead. But Henderson, he's got that big home run ability, and next season he's going to be one of the better running backs, I believe, in fantasy football. So this week in a matchup at Baltimore, where they're vulnerable to giving up big plays, I like Henderson as a top 10 option. Number 11, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So this week it's a tough matchup, no doubt about it, at the Denver Broncos, one of the best, if not the best, defenses in the league. But we saw Josh Jacobs go out there last week, have good success. And now LaBacial Tootin out for the season, getting the surgery, is going to be even more touches for Etienne, where at times Tootin was eating into the workload. But like I said, volume's been there. Him and Lawrence are making plays in this offense. And even at a tough matchup at Denver, I think Etienne has a good game. Number 12, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Brown's definitely turned things around over the last month and a half of the season. And with Joe Burrow back in the lineup, his numbers have gone up even more. So this week, a good matchup with the Dolphins, a defense that can't stop anyone. We saw last week Kenneth Gainwell have a big game versus defense, and I think Chase Brown is an RB1 option for owners this week. 13, RJ Harvey of the Denver Broncos. So RJ Harvey, he's been solid since Dobbins has been out with injury, and this week, pretty good matchup with Jacksonville coming in. I know the defense has been decent over the last couple weeks, but they've had easier matchups is this Jacksonville Jaguar team. But RJ Harvey, 3 down back, physical in between the tackles, even though he's a little bit of a smaller back. Good pass catcher, obviously, out of the backfield. And there's no competition in this backfield for him. 14, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. So Henry, last week the work got cut a little bit for him. He had 11 carries, still went for 100 yards in that game at the Cincinnati Bengals. A team, obviously, he's had big success. He had great success against in his career. So this week, New England coming in, we know their defense is stout for the most part, even though James Cook had a monster game last week versus defense with 3 TDs. But Henry still having a solid season once again, even though not the crazy elite numbers, he's still putting up solid numbers, borderline RB1 numbers for fantasy owners. 15, Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. So last week he looked good, Javonte Williams. He was banged up a little bit with a shoulder, neck area type of thing, but he came back in the second half, and he's been the bell cow all season long for this Dallas Cowboy team. So with the Chargers coming in and their middle-of-the-pack defense, I like Williams still to go out there and have a good game this week. 16, Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. Kyren found the end zone twice, but the only thing with him, he's pretty much in a 50-50 split over the last couple weeks here, and Blake Corum's vultured him a couple times, and this week it is a tougher matchup at Seattle. That's why he's dropped down the list a little bit. 17, Amarian Hampton of the Los Angeles Chargers. Him and Vidal still pretty much in that 60-40, maybe even 50-50 split at times here. But Hampton now, this will be his 3rd game back in the lineup. This Cowboy defense can't stop anyone. And I think Amarian Hampton this week, they're going to lean on him even more. And it's an indoor game as well, which is a good thing, obviously, from a team that plays in Los Angeles to go indoors, especially this time of year. 18, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. Last week a big game it was for Swift. This week a tougher matchup with Green Bay coming in, but obviously with Micah Parsons out for the season tearing the ACL, it's going to open up a few things in this offense, I think, for Chicago, where Parsons, obviously one of the better pass rushers in the league. He gets a lot of pressures. I know versus the run he ain't great. Obviously this defense is going to take a step back, and that's going to help Swift, in my opinion, this week. 19, Rico Dowdle of the Carolina Panthers. Rico Dowdle, he had a good game last week. He found the end zone in New Orleans. Tampa Bay coming in, big division game for first place in the division here. Rico Dowdle's been the better back this season than Chuba Hubbard, and that's why he's been getting majority of the work. So this week versus Tampa, I think he goes out there as another good game. 20, Kenneth Gainwell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Gainwell, he could do a little bit of everything, run in between the tackles, good receiver out of the backfield, and pretty much he's the number 2 option in this passing game. He's been consistently all season long behind DK Metcalf. A lot of dump-offs, a lot of quick outs. It's been to Gainwell. We saw it on Monday night versus the Dolphins, and this week at Detroit, they're going to have to utilize him in those ways if they want to keep up on the scoreboard. 21, Woody Marks of the Houston Texans. So last week he left that ball game. He didn't come back, and he said he could have came back in if they need him, but the Texans were on a route in that one versus the Cardinals. So this week Marks should be back in the lineup, and it's a slam dunk matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, where I expect Marks to go out there and have a pretty good performance. 22, Breece Hall with the New York Jets. Last week a bad game all around for the Jets. It wasn't Breece Hall at the Jacksonville Jaguars. This week a better matchup on paper at the New Orleans Saints. And Breece Hall, we know he's a talented running back, catch the football out of the backfield, even though they haven't utilized him much doing that this season, and physical in between the tackles. So this week at the Saints, I think he'll bounce back. 23, Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. So this week, not a great matchup versus Minnesota. Their defense over the last couple weeks has gotten a little bit better, and they held down that Dallas Cowboy offense to 23 points in that game. So that's a tough feat to do. And I think Tyrone Tracy, though, it's obviously his backfield. Singletary didn't do much in last week's game, where Tracy made some big plays. And this week versus the Vikings, he's a borderline 2 option for owners. 24, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Jaylen Warren lost the job a little bit after we saw Gainwell go out there, have a big game. And pretty much it's going to be a 50-50 split. And like I said, if you want to put points on the board, you're going to have to use Kenneth Gainwell out of the backfield. So that's where Warren a little bit takes a hit. Like we saw last week, Gainwell outplayed him big time in that game. But this week at Detroit, I think both backs are going to be factors and good starting options as well. 25, Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. So this week, not a great matchup versus the Buffalo Bills. And if they're chasing points early and often, pretty much you could have low expectations for Quinshon Judkins, where he's not much of a receiver out of the backfield. Is something he's got to work on the offseason. But like I said, if Buffalo's up to an early lead, this Cleveland team, they're going to abandon the run, and that's where his ceiling might not be high. 26, Ashton Jeanty of the Vegas Raiders. So this week, a tough matchup with the Texans, one of the best, if not the best defenses in the league. And this offense has taken a hit over the last couple weeks. Kenny Pickett started last week. They couldn't even put a point on the board, losing 31-0 to the Philadelphia Eagles. And this week now you got to go to Houston, even a better defense. I just think it's going to be a long day for Ashton Jeanty. 27, Michael Carter of the Arizona Cardinals. So Bam Knight, he's out with an ankle sprain. And next man up, this is the fourth running back now they run Arizona. So Carter, he got some work a few weeks ago as a starter, and then Bam Knight took over. But Carter, we know, could catch the football out of the backfield in between the tackles. He's a veteran running back. And this week, it's a pretty decent matchup with Atlanta coming in, where I think Carter could actually go out there and have a decent performance. 28, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. Aaron Jones, I just feel like they don't utilize him enough. Is this Minnesota Viking team. And Jordan Mason, he's still on the field getting a decent amount of touches as well. And Aaron Jones, it just seems like in the last few games he's not even getting his own drives, where they're mixing and matching him and Jordan Mason and looking to throw the football a little bit more with J.J. McCarthy the last couple of weeks. But this week it is a good matchup at the New York Giants, but the ceiling just isn't high to me for Aaron Jones. 29, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. So Tony Pollard, the last couple of weeks, he finally broke out and put in some big ball games as Tony Pollard. A couple weeks ago at Cleveland, he had a big game. And then last week versus the 49ers, granted, it was garbage time. He still went out there and had over 100 yards from scrimmage and found the end zone. So this week, it's going to be a tougher matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs coming in. I know this Chief team, they didn't make the playoffs, but the defense hasn't been the problem for the most part for them. 30, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Hunt's the guy you want in that backfield. Pretty much Isaiah Pacheco, they're going to let him walk in free agency the way they've just been using him over the last few weeks. And Kareem Hunt, he could do a little bit of everything. I know he's definitely lost a step considering where he was a few years ago was Kareem Hunt, but still a running back that's physical in between the tackles. And now and can catch the football out of the backfield if you need him to. And now with Mahomes out for the season, Gardner Minshew, I think they don't want him throwing the football a whole lot, where they'll run the ball a little bit more. 31, Blake Corum of the Los Angeles Rams. So Blake Corum, it's been a good second half of the season for him. He's getting more touches, pretty much in a 50-50 split with him and Kyren Williams over the last month of the season. He found the end zone last week, and this week it is a tougher matchup at the 12th man at the Seattle Seahawks. But like I said, Blake Corum, he's a running back that could do a little bit of everything. And obviously Sean McVay and his coaching staff likes him a lot, and they want to keep Kyren fresh for the playoffs. 32, Bill Krosky-Merritt of the Washington Commanders. Krosky-Merritt, I think he got the job back last week. We had a good ball game, even though it was at the New York Giants. We had 96 yards and found the end zone. And this week it is a tougher matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles. But we know Krosky-Merritt, he's a starting running back and someone that's going to crack that top 36, where we'll see, maybe he gets a goal line touchdown or something along those lines. But like I said, obviously I don't think the ceiling's high. 33, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. So Kenneth Walker, I thought this season he was going to be a solid running back, but pretty much this offense is all about JSN and this defense creating turnovers, and Jason Myers being the best kicker in the league this season. So with those factors and a tough matchup versus the Rams, obviously it's tough to trust Walker this week. 34, Audric Estime of the New Orleans Saints. So we saw Devin Neal, he left last week's game and he was ruled out immediately with the hamstring injury. So I don't think Alvin Kamara is going to come back, and if he does, I still don't think he's going to get a full workload. But with the Saint team going nowhere, be one of the worst teams in the league, I don't think they're going to rush back Alvin Kamara. And like I said, Devin Neal last week, he went out with that hamstring injury, and there's no follow-up on Neal. But I'm assuming he's not going to play in this week's game. So I'm going to go with Audric Estime, a physical back, was with the Broncos for a couple seasons. Actually, Sean Payton liked him, but I had too many backs on the roster, and they cut him loose. And this week it's a pretty decent matchup with the Jets coming in. 35, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. So David Montgomery at this point, he's been a touchdown-dependent running back. Jahmyr Gibbs is the guy over there, obviously, and rightfully so for this Detroit Lions team with his home run hitting ability, and you could even line him up at receiver at times. So like I said, Montgomery last year was a 50-50 split, or even in his favor a little bit, but this season he's taken a backseat, and this week versus Pittsburgh, I don't like the upside. In the 36 and final back I'm ranking is Kyle Monangai of the Chicago Bears. This week, not a great matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. I know Micah Parsons out for the season with the torn ACL. But I think last week DeAndre Swift distanced himself a little bit, where he had a big ball game in that one with Swift versus the Cleveland Browns. So this week with the Packers coming in, going to be a cold weather game once again. Monangai, he's another running back where he's been touchdown dependent on his limited touch. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for week 16 of the fantasy football season.